What is up, freaks? It's your boy Marty here to introduce this episode of Tales from the Crypt. This one's a long time coming. Can't believe it took me over 3 years to get Jimmy Song on the podcast. We sat down to talk about a new book that he co-authored with a bunch of Bitcoiners. Thank God for Bitcoin. Creation, corruption, and redemption of money. Tying Bitcoin to Christianity. May be triggering for some of you freaks. And there's a lot of atheists out there. I know there's a lot of God haters, but really liked this episode, enjoyed it. Diving deep, talking about positivism versus natural law theory, sound money versus easy money, the societal ills that leak when you have a society built on easy money, and how a sound monetary standard lowers time preference collectively and makes society better off overall. So you guys are going to like this. I'm not going to spoil it too much. Again, long time coming. Really happy Jimmy and I were able to get this in the bag here. Speaking of in the bag, how's your bag looking these days? Are you stacking sats? Are you stacking sats? Are you not? If you're not, it's time to look at the motherfucking Cash App. Cash App. I hope you stack sats, send sats, receive sats, and sell sats if you so please. We're saying sats. For you freaks who don't know, maybe new to the podcast, what are sats? What the hell are sats, Uncle Marty? What is this sats you're talking about? Sats is short for Satoshis. And one Bitcoin can be broken down into 100 million units known as Satoshis or sats. So 100 million sats equals one Bitcoin. And you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can stack sats. Instead of buying a fraction of a Bitcoin, we're stacking whole sats on the Cash App. And on top of that, you can DCA in the sats. What's DCA, Uncle Marty? What's that? What's DCA? Dollar cost average. You can set it and forget it automatically on the Cash App. You can buy daily, weekly, bi-weekly. You put in the amount you want to buy on that set cadence that you choose, and you're automatically stacking sats in the background. On top of that, you can stack slivers of stonks via Cash App investing if you so please. Because all this is connected to your bank account, there's no 4 to 5 day waiting periods. You can start stacking today. On top of that, they have the Bruce program connected to their debit card, their Boost card, accepted anywhere Visa is accepted. Personalize that card, initiate a Boost with a partner merchant, go shop there, save some money, use that saved money, stack some sats. It's that simple. On top of that, Cash App can even be your bank account if you want to. They're allowing individuals to get accounting numbers and routing numbers so they can direct deposit their paychecks into the Cash App. Want to cut out the old evil banks, you can use Cash App. And if you do download the Cash App, make sure you use the code STACKINGSATS. It's STACKINGSATS. You're going to get $10, and $10 is going to go to our good friends at Owls Lacrosse. That's Owls Lacrosse. I know we said Owls Lacrosse, but I was driving to pick up breakfast this morning, and I saw a bald eagle. So I'm gonna do what I think a bald eagle would say to an owl. All right, use the code Stacking Sats, download the Cash App today, and enjoy this episode, freaks. I thoroughly did. Tiki.
You've had a dynamic where money's become freer than free.
If you talk about a Fed just gone nuts, all the central banks going nuts.
So it's all acting like safe haven.
I believe that in a world where central bankers are tripping over themselves to devalue their currency, Bitcoin wins. In the world of fiat currencies, Bitcoin is the victor.
I mean, that's part of the bull case for Bitcoin.
If you're not paying attention, you probably should be.
What is up, freaks? Welcome back to Tales from the Crypt. It's your boy Marty Bent here. Wednesday night rip. Very excited for this. Actually embarrassed. Jimmy, I'm sorry it's taken us this long. It's about 3 years into this podcast, and this is your first appearance.
Well, if there's anything that I have to say, I forgive you. It's okay.
Very fitting for the conversation we're about to embark on.
Indeed, it is.
Yes. So obviously, sitting down with Jimmy Song, prolific Bitcoiner, educator, host of the Bitcoin Fixes This podcast, author and co-author of many books, including the Little Bitcoin book and Programming Bitcoin. But tonight, we're here to talk about another book Thank God for Bitcoin, the creation, corruption, and redemption of money. I'm very excited for this conversation because, as I was mentioning to you, Jimmy, I've opened up recently on this podcast. I've been getting a little closer to Jesus recently, just because the world out there seems a bit nihilistic. I've had a son enter my life that really sort of, I guess, grounds you. As you know, you have many children yourself. And I think this topic particularly is very interesting. I was actually on a phone call with a friend of mine, telling him that I was about to interview you about this subject particularly. We're talking about the parallels between Bitcoin's inception and Christianity specifically. So thank God for Bitcoin. You graciously gave me a free Kindle version so I could skim through it before this conversation. And the content, I think, is going to be eye-opening for a lot of people. First of all, Russell Okung, right in the forward.
His brother-in-law George McHale is one of the co-authors. So he offered to write it. He was very excited about the project. Like it's kind of crazy. Like I don't know if you want the backstory of how it came about or whatever, but
now let's rip it. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So George and I met in LA when Russell held his Bitcoin conference, Bitcoin is, and we were talking, and we both discovered that we were Christian, and we kept in touch after the conference, and he and I just started emailing each other, and we were just sort of asking interesting spiritual questions about Bitcoin. And eventually we brought in a third guy, and we started doing like a Bible study. And after we had done like a little bit of a study of just, money in the Bible, and there's a lot of scripture about money. So we did like 3 or 4 of those. After that, we were like, you know what, we should invite more people and see what happens. Pretty much everyone I asked said yes, and everyone he asked said yes, and we ended up getting, we had at one point like 10 people in the Bible study. Towards the end, we're just like, okay, and we started studying your Guido Halsman's The Ethics of Money Production, which is an Austrian economics book, but there's just so much like church history in there and so much moral arguments about it. Are you familiar?
Oh, yes. It's one of my favorite books on money production. Actually, again, the friend I was having a conversation with before I was telling him, I was like, this reminds me of The Ethics of Money Production.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely inspired. The book that we read next was Honest Money by Gary North. And I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but he used to be an advisor to Ron Paul. He calls himself a Christian economist, and he goes through various biblical verses and argues for sound money, basically. And towards the end of going through both books, the conclusion we came to was both books are great, right? Like they argue essentially for why the current system is just so corrupt, but that we found both books' endings pretty depressing because both were written before Bitcoin pretty much, and the call to action was something like, we need to get more people to understand the importance of the gold standard, and we need to take political action to put us back on the gold standard, which Nixon took us off in 1971. And we were like, that is not going to happen. And we need to write one that has something with Bitcoin in it, because Bitcoin is the missing piece for both books, we felt like. And that's essentially the book we ended up writing.
Yeah. And I love the excerpts from the Bible that you pull out, and I think we could start the conversation around one specifically that's commonly misquoted, which is the love of money is the root of all evil. People usually drop out the first half of that and just say money is the root of all evil.
Right.
And I think another particular quote that you guys pulled too is, you can't serve two gods at once. God and money, being money essentially turning into a god, driving everybody's life, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck in an inflationary environment, trying to stay up. You're basically serving the debt-fueled fiat system. And I think let's focus on the first one. The love of money is the root of all evil. How is that misinterpreted in your opinion, and what does it actually mean?
Yeah, I think for Christians especially, and even non-Christians, there's a sense in which like money is kind of beneath them, right? I'm too principled for money, right? Like it's as if it's something that they should be above, and pretty much everyone acts that way. But when you actually watch their behavior, they care very deeply about money, and they do everything that they can for money. And if they can get just a small raise, they'll go and switch jobs in a completely different industry and everything. Their actions belie what they actually believe, despite what they sort of like say they believe. And that's one aspect in which money is the root of all evil. If you misquote it, that's what it becomes. It's like, oh, it should be beneath me. But if you actually study scripture, if you study the Bible, yeah, money is not put into this like place beneath us, right? It's very much a part of being human, and it's how we relate to each other. It's how we, make a living. It's a way to store up value that you've provided through your work, through the work of your hands. And a large part of what it means to be human, the whole concept of dignity comes from bearing the image of God. And that essentially means that you create things with your hands, with you have that power that pretty much nothing else has. Is as humans, we have the ability to create something or make order out of chaos. And money is a critical part of that, because when we do that and we provide value for others, we get to store it up in money and then get to spend it in some way that in the future as a hedge against uncertainty. So love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, not all evil, right? All kinds of evil. And that I think is definitely true, because there is a sense in which you can serve the created thing instead of the creator. And that is something that we emphasize in the book, is that, if you do serve money, then you're doing something wrong. And it leads to all sorts of spiritual pathology, as I would call it. But if if money is in its proper place, then all sorts of things are really good, and good things come out of that, of civilization, and it's a wonderful thing. So yeah, that's how I would put that verse. Unfortunately, the current system makes it very difficult to put money in its proper place. It's either too far beneath us or too far above us, and that's not the right place.
No, and I think this ties in perfectly to the introduction of the book, or the foreword of the book, by Russell, in which he lays out the story of the two houses or buildings that were built, one with a solid foundation, another built on a foundation of sand. And it's becoming glaringly obvious that our current economy and the whole pricing mechanism of the world, the money, is built on a foundation of sand. And the transition to the Bitcoin standard will hopefully get us back to a solid foundation. Like, how important is a quality foundation in society? Like, we were like the love of money, these all kinds of evil, is focused really on the individual. But when you think about a foundational aspect for a whole society and how that matriculates from individual to individual to create something vast like a global economy, like, how important is money as a solid foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I think like an engineer, and I remember back in '98 when I started my programming career, I had to program with two different web servers for some websites that I was building and things like that. One was on Windows, and it was IIS, and one was on Linux, and it was called Apache. Now, I knew that Apache was far superior. And if you've ever built web apps, I mean, there are many better things now, like Lighty and Nginx and many other things. But back then, Apache, it was either Apache or IIS. if you built anything on Apache, it would scale pretty well. If you built anything on IAS, it got dicey really fast because the Windows Server world was just horrible, and it sucked up too many resources, and it couldn't handle that many concurrent users and all this other stuff. I'm sure it's better now, but at least back then it was terrible. And that's how I kind of see money, because if you build it on the wrong foundation, then everything on top of it suffers from that bad foundation. I mean, we've built lots of great things, but they're built on this really terrible foundation, and it makes it very difficult to upkeep a lot of those things. I mean, we've made air travel pretty much ubiquitous, and internet ubiquitous as well. But those things are on kind of a terrible foundation. It's not a coincidence that a lot of airlines are like near bankruptcy or go through bankruptcy every 5, 7, 8 years or something like that. The bad money creates these bad industries, whereas a good money creates much more solid footing by which these things can grow. And I think that's how I would understand that analogy with respect to money.
Yeah, that was one thing your Guido Holzman really drilled on in the ethics of money production, is the misallocation of capital that proceeds from a fiat debt-based monetary system leads to the crappy economies that we have.
Yeah, I mean, not just the crappy economies, like that's one aspect of it, but that's they're far more significant second and third order effects. And I think those things that affect character, that affect society, like that affect time preference, that affect, you know, how we view things. Like we were talking earlier about, you know, you started to value your relationship with Jesus more because you had a son. That very that choice of having a kid, that in itself is largely today driven by money, right? Like the first question that every couple ask themselves when it's like, oh, well, we want to have kids, but we can't afford it, right? Like that. How many times have you heard that?
I mean, I'm 29. That conversation is pervasive throughout some of the couples that I know. You know?
Yeah, and it's the first question that they ask, and like one of the questions that we ask in the book is, okay, well, if you are doing that, then what are you trusting, right? If you're a Christian, what are you trusting there? Because presumably, if you had enough money, then you're trusting that the money will take care of the kid. But it wasn't always that way, right? Like that's putting money, like sort of trusting money to do things that it can't, which is to take care of your kid. You never know what the future is going to hold. But if you think oh, well, if I just make a little more money, then I can afford a kid. That's not the right way to look at it, at least biblically or as a Christian. It's very much more on faith in God. And like for a lot of people in the past, that's what they did. And they had lots more kids than we do now, because it's not about affording it. It's about doing what God says. And there's a pretty clear mandate: be fruitful and multiply. He wants you to have more kids. So that to me is a very clear indicator that money has a place that it doesn't, that it shouldn't be in pretty much everyone's life.
Yeah, and that's how you start out the book with chapter 1, is understanding money, and trying to define how people should understand money. And so I guess we can jump into how people misunderstand money and how they should view it.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, it's become sort of like this means to an end, and because of the way that that money doesn't allow you to save, they tend to have a very high time preference instead of saving, and they consume a lot more, and that has an impact on your soul, right? Like there are things that if you continue to indulge in, it rots from the inside, and you don't have the proper perspective anymore on certain things. And I think it's pervasive throughout society. And this one of the points that we make in the book is, you know, when you have a bad money, it causes everybody that uses that money to go in a certain direction. And it's towards more debt and more high time preference thinking and doing all of these things that you wouldn't otherwise. If you were under a different monetary system, you wouldn't necessarily spend on the newest iPhone or whatever. It would be, you would have different priorities, and you would think about things more long term, a lot easier. And the thing is, if you have an entire civilization that's thinking very short term, then the civilization's going to collapse. But if you have people that are thinking long term, then it builds up. And yeah, these are the second and third order effects that we explore in the book.
Yeah. No, that line of thinking has me thinking, just like going back to the misallocation of capital and creating things that may have otherwise not been created, companies particularly, if we were under a sounder monetary system. Just thinking my early 20s, hanging, like myself included, working jobs I didn't love just for a paycheck. And so you have millennials. I'm going to focus on millennials, my generation, working these jobs they don't like in cubes, pushing Excel sheets, doing things they don't want to do, working for that paycheck, typically working paycheck to paycheck until 25. You get a pay raise, maybe you can save some money, get a new apartment or whatever. But during that time, like the misallocation of capital, creating these companies where people are working and they don't want to work there, creates like a sense of dread. There's like an existential dread that nobody really wants to talk about, which forces these high time preference activities. Like you hit Friday, or even during the week, you're Quizzo, going to the bar every night, dollar beer night, whatever it is. You're living for the weekend so that you can get, frankly, hammered to forget like the woes of the work week.
Yeah. There's definitely a component of working a job you hate just because it makes a lot of money, because you've essentially made money your god at that point. It's just, I will do anything for money, and money is a very cruel and harsh master, like that forces you to work and gives you no rest whatsoever, and puts you in a position that's always going to enslave you. And the modern monetary system is essentially making claims dominion over you very easily, and that's not a good thing at all, especially with the advent of like credit card debt and things like that, because the government can print money whenever it wants. And whenever a credit card company extends you credit, that credit does not come from somebody else's savings. It comes out of nothing. It's always printed for your benefit. So because that like sort of valve is there, people end up using it, and it ends up corrupting their souls, and they have this existential dread. But I would point out another aspect of that existential dread, which is that there's a lot of jobs that are more or less meaningless in our society today because of the easy money policies, because of all of the money printing that's always constantly going on. There's a lot of rent-seeking jobs, and these don't add value to anybody, but you end up doing them, and like you might even be making a lot of money. But it's not a coincidence that like the investment bankers in New York are like the biggest drug users. Like there's that existential dread is real, and you can't ignore it for very long before you go crazy. And for that reason, those people end up having to numb that voice inside that's saying you are not doing anything that's useful, and that you are ultimately detracting from civilization, and that you are a drag on everybody else. And in order to quiet that voice, you end up getting addicted to almost everything, like, whether it be drugs or, food or sugar or, sports or, pretty much anything is addictive these days.
Yeah. It's crazy. Are we a wayward society?
Yeah, I would say so. And money got us there. And it's been going off in this this weird direction of making money God, essentially, in order to serve ourselves. And it's kind of a weird way to look at life, as if it's something to just dread for one part of it, so you can sort of numb out the dread from the rest of the week and the weekend. Like that doesn't seem fulfilling to me at all. But that's the reality of many millennials, like you said, but probably a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, and it's mandated too. So I was thinking this conversation, as part of the conversations, making me think of a Twitter thread I saw. It was a conversation between Vik Raj and Malayank. Sorry if I'm butchering your name, but they were talking about like jobs being a goal, right, and not like economic efficiency. And so I think one of the two reference, I think it was Friedman, who took a trip to China and witnessed like 100 people digging a ditch, and he pointed out to the person he was visiting, like, why do you have all these people digging a ditch? One bulldozer could do this job. He's like, well, what would happen to everybody else's job? He's like, oh, well, if your goal is more jobs, you should give them spoons. Right?
Yeah, and that's unfortunately the attitude of a lot of the elite people. It's like they have no conception that people can have a purpose outside of themselves. So they kind of have to give them a job or something, as if it's as if people have no creativity whatsoever, or can't figure out what they would be doing without the government's help.
Yeah. But everybody's caught in that trap. Like, you got to get a job. You got to get a job no matter what. Get a paycheck, get your degree, go into debt, get a job. I mean, obviously, some of us have broken free of that mindset, but it's the dominant mindset, particularly here in America.
Yeah, well, it's more about like corporatism, I think, and there is the sense that you don't have a real job if you go into go work for yourself, unless it's sort of like the approved VC model or something like that, where you're having to apply, and it has a lot of the same dynamics as like a normal job, which is based on not necessarily your performance, but on the impression that you make on other people. And that's what you're judged on. So everybody kind of learns how to display those job signals, or like cultural signals, or whatever it is, to get those jobs, and then perform just well enough to not to get fired. And if you're particularly ambitious, to look good to your superior, so that you can move up the ladder and so on. And unfortunately, this is a large part of American society, right? It are these jobs that have a spin to them, right? Like you have to constantly present yourself a certain way, rather than it being by merits at all. I mean, like even stuff like sports, it's like okay, well, if you're a good teammate, then you're going to have get a better chance at a job, unless you happen to be like a transcendent talent or something like that. It's not really about a meritocracy. Whereas in a real market with lots of entrepreneurs, then it really is about the value that you're providing. And that's I think how it's supposed to be. That's God's intention for the world, is for people to interact in a way where you're contributing things to other people. And it's not about like sort of like the impression that you make on people, or I mean, unless that happens to be your job. It's much more about the value that you're providing to others. And that's a lot more real than this, like, I don't know, smoke and mirrors thing that everyone has to do when they're in quote unquote job. And unfortunately, we get trained for it from a very early age, starting in the 12 years of government mandated prison that we put our kids through. And you get trained to like do something, appear a certain way, and then eventually you go and do the same thing at a company, and maybe you make it up the ladder to VP or something like that, and then you retire and die. It's what a horrible existence. I don't know.
I agree, but so I guess
where we could take this right now, particularly, is like, how does a sound monetary system, a sound money, allow people to lower their time preference and focus on providing value to others instead of chasing paycheck after paycheck in a easy monetary system?
Yeah, so once you have sound money, you well, first of all, you get rid of all the unsound money, because sound money wins over unsound money every time. If you're going to save in one, and this is something that we've talked about, I think, in the Bitcoin community for a while, is this whole idea of hyper Bitcoinization. When everyone just takes the good money, that just gets more and more expensive, whereas the bad money, which is the US dollar or whatever fiat currency, it gets worse and worse and it drops in price. At some point, Bitcoin's just going to win because no one's going to take dollars. Now, that might happen 5 years from now, for 100 years from now, I don't know. But at some point, that's going to happen because the harder money is going to win. And we have really hard money with Bitcoin. Now, when you have that, it takes away the power of the dollar. And the power of the dollar is that it can be printed for almost any purpose at any time in the form of loans. And it's done at every single level. It's not just done at the level of the Federal Reserve, but it's all their member banks and all their operations, which include commercial and retail and investment banking. All of them get access to printed money on whim through loans. And there's not even a reserve requirement anymore. Not that that was ever really a barrier to begin with. But basically, anytime anyone is qualified and wants a loan, they get the loan, and more money comes into existence. And that's how it's been for quite a while now. So that is a major structural part of the world today. And that means that, like, you can pretty much get everything now and pay it back later. That's essentially what a loan is. So anybody that's sufficiently powerful can get whatever they want, and right now, and not have to wait. So it's a mentality of very high preference all across the entire spectrum of people. And this is from the very rich people all the way down to the very poor people, who have access to loans. They're just way more expensive. They're called like payday loans or something like that. And you know, the debt service on those is significantly higher. But they can do that too. And when you get rid of that, now you kind of have to save. You have to do something or rely on the charity of others or whatever. And that makes you appreciate money a lot more, I think. And in so doing, that makes you want to save more money, because you can see the value that it has for other people. And that means that in order to earn that money, you actually have to go out and provide value to other people instead of a rent-seeking job, because all of those are gone too once you eliminate all of these weird inefficiencies that come out of fiat money. So in that way, I think you get something much more akin to the gold standard, the Gilded Age, where they built like entire canals and railroads, and well, not railroads in particular in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, they were able to build them without any public money whatsoever. It was through like entrepreneurs that were like, okay, we can make a profit and things like that.
Are you saying we could build roads without the government?
I would say so. I hope so. I mean, the ability.
Who's going to build
the
roads? Who's going to build the roads, Jimmy? I can never do it.
Yeah. That's always like a talking point of the anti-libertarians, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess that segues into like the transition to a hard money is scary for a lot. Most people are scared of it. Like, oh, we're going to lose all these crappy jobs. Deflation. Like, how do we transition? I think the thought of a transition and the uncertainty that would come with that scares a lot of people. And how can we sort of lower those fears or remove those fears from people?
Yeah, we have the main strategy, I think, from the book is basically showing you all of the consequences of the current system now and get you to like just recognize all of the costs that we're paying, almost at a level of the soul, right? Like, because if you do have very high time preference, well, you're kind of losing your soul a little bit. You're always kind of like doing things that aren't in your long-term best interest, and ultimately that leads to a brokenness, a dread, almost like a spiritual bankruptcy that comes from a financial bankruptcy, that ultimately, is not just unsatisfying, but like a break in who you are. It's a terrible place to be in, and hopefully that scares enough people to say, okay, well, that means that we need to do something else, instead of this fear of uncertainty that comes from like not knowing what a future with sound money might be like. I mean, we try to paint a good picture of that too, but ultimately, once people recognize all of the spiritual consequences, I mean, there are lots of really miserable billionaires. And I mean, imagine if you, like, even if you made $1 billion and you are completely miserable, most people think that they would be really happy when they're billionaires. Fact, like, if you look at facts, that's not the case at all. Like, they're just as unhappy as any other sort of segment. It's just that we worship money, so we think that money will solve whatever problems we have. Newsflash, it's not money that's going to solve your problem. You need something deeper than that, and this is the spiritual aspect of it that I don't think a lot of people really have grasped or digested and really made real for themselves. And that's something that we hope to do with this book.
Well, I hope you're successful, because it seems like God is dying in today's day and age. People, let's be honest, there's going to be a lot of freaks out there listening to this and they're like sort of roll their eyes like, Marty's talking about Jesus again. Like, God damn it. Like, people are repulsed by religion. Not even Christianity, just religion, spirit, like believing in a higher being and living for a greater good with that higher being in mind.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Like, well, I have some thoughts. Yeah. I mean, maybe people don't want to admit that their life has not had meaning up to this point, and to have to pivot and admit that there is a higher being that you should live for is a hard pill to swallow. The hedonistic tendencies and stuff like that, and turning towards a higher being is maybe something people don't want to do.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Nietzsche wrote with the whole God is dead stuff, right? Like, and like that dialogue, I think, is pretty misunderstood today. Like, he said God is dead because here are all the consequences of removing God from, your moral framework, and what are you going to do about it? Because this is a monumental thing. You remove God from the equation, which pretty much the Enlightenment thinkers did, but then they kept all of the consequences of God, which is the moral framework by which civilization was. And Nietzsche was like, okay, well, you remove God, but you kept this, but that's all going to crumble. And I think that's what you're describing here with, like people that are kind of rolling their eyes or whatever, is that once you remove God from the equation, you remove like a lot of meaning, a lot of morality, a lot of what it means to be human, or what it means to actually achieve something or have a purpose or anything. And this is something that Nietzsche pointed out. And, Nietzsche's solution was completely off the rails, because he basically said you need to be a sociopath and have like this will to power morality where, might is right and you get to do whatever you want to other people and whatever, right? Like that's his like Nietzschean Superman or whatever. And I that's a very dark and nihilistic world. And that's unfortunately the spiritual bankruptcy that we have to deal with right now. And it's a sad and dreadful kind of reality for people to have to deal with, and instead they go and drown it in alcohol or something. It's oof. Yeah.
Right. And this year is really driving this home, right? We have sociopathic people in charge who are forcing the masses, very few people, forcing billions of people to act in a certain way that is unnatural. It's very weird. I think some people are waking up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a transition that I think that has happened over the past couple of 100 years. Is post Enlightenment, it went from the rulers had at least some idea that there was an authority above them, right? Like, or before the Enlightenment, rather, there was a sense that, okay, well, I may be king, but I'm still under the authority of God. And if I do something really evil, he's going to punish me, something like that. And there was at least that fear, or I have to represent him in what I do and make sure that I am ruling justly and kindly and all this other stuff. Once you remove God from that equation, then it really becomes kind of this Nietzschean rule, right? Like very much, I get to tell you what you are allowed to do. And I think from a legal standpoint, that's called positivism. It's this idea that you only have rights that the government gives you. But if you think from a ruler's perspective, that's extremely nihilistic and Nietzschean. It's I have the power to enforce this, and you can't do anything about it anyway. So practically speaking, this is the morality that you have to subscribe to, is that if I give you that right, then you have it. If I don't give you that right, then you don't have it. Right to, cut hair for money, or drive taxis for money, or whatever. Like, these are all things that the government can give you the right to do or not. Whereas if you live in a world with God in it, then, or where you believe that God exists, then there's this whole concept of natural law, of having rights that belong to you because you are created in his image, and that you have dignity because you bear God's image, and so on. And that those are completely different views. And what we're seeing is this nihilistic, like, controlling government and authority that's come to the forefront as a result of essentially removing God from the equation, starting during the Enlightenment, and getting worse and worse, up until now.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy you brought up natural law theory, because I know we've both spoken about this and said this, that Bitcoin is the greatest extension of natural law theory in quite a while, right? Preserving personal property rights and endowing the individual with full control over his digital bearer asset. This is going to have massive implications on society. That the fact that natural rights have been extended now in the digital age via Bitcoin. Thank God, right? Thank God for Bitcoin.
Indeed. And that's the thing. It's natural rights are ours, and if somebody takes them away, that is morally wrong. If I take your property, right, you have the natural right to property. If I take your property, it's wrong regardless if I'm a robber or if I am the government. Either way, it is wrong because it is yours, and if somebody takes it, then they are committing theft. At least this is according to Christian theology. I think most people would say the same. Even the most, I think this is a quote from the book, even the most ardent communist, if something is taken away from them, they will feel angry or sad or both, because it's property that's being taken away. Like, to a large degree, most people agree that natural law exists, and that, but to justify that without God is a very, very tough thing. I've seen it done, but usually they rely on some sort of rhetorical sleight of hand to some degree. And and if you remove God, then you have positivism. You have no natural rights. You have only will to power. You only have, those in authority and those that are not. And it's a horrible, horrible world.
Yeah, that's why Thomas Aquinas is probably one of the best philosophers to read on natural right theory. natural law theory, excuse me, because he ties it all back.
And he does it from a very rational perspective, which I really appreciate. And Summa Theologica is like steelman argument after steelman argument. Here's the best argument I can make against what I believe, and let's figure out, like, here's my response to all of those things. And it's absolutely brilliant. I like one of the most underappreciated thinkers. But then again, in a nihilistic society, I read this the other day. You end. It is the end of history, right? Like, you don't study history anymore for the sake of learning what it is. It's become very Nietzschean. It's history as a discipline has become whatever the winners want it to be in order to fit the narrative that they want to advance, which is very 1984-ish, but that's exactly what's happening. Like one of the things that was pointed out in the book I was reading was, you look at the history classes available at Harvard right now, it's like, queer theory, African American studies, Asian American studies, colonial, I don't know, like some negative word, like colonial violence or something like that. Like, you learn nothing about there's not a class on the Renaissance, Reformation, any of these things that we would normally put as like some of the most pivotal things that happened in history. Not a class on those, because it's now become like this narrative shaping thing, very 1984, instead of learning about what actually happened.
Yeah, part of the patriarchy. You can't talk about the patriarchy. And then, like, today YouTube announcing they're gonna pull down videos that run against the grain of the narrative about the election right now. Like, you can't have wrong thought about the election.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't that sound very Nietzschean? It's and like there's no objective standard that anyone goes to anymore. It's, we're going to do this, and we're going to rationalize it maybe according to whatever code of ethics that you might believe, but we're going to impose this on you, and you have to take it. And that's what this whole coronavirus, crisis and lockdowns and masks and everything, it's been that way the entire time. The justification comes afterwards only as a way to appease people that already believe, already want you in power. Like for anyone that disagrees with you, it is, you have to take this. It's not an argument made from, even the arguments made from public safety, I think, are not done in like with any integrity at all. It's just, here's what we're going to do, and we want to do this, and therefore you kind of have to take it. And that it's like, ever since like even like the Jeffrey Epstein thing, right? It was, we're not even going to bother covering it up or making it sound like remotely plausible. It's just, yeah, he died. Oh, the cameras weren't working. Oh, and nobody was watching. And yeah, that's what happened.
Go on with your lives. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, it's extremely Nietzschean, and it should be frightening, because it's a bunch of sociopaths that are running this whole thing. It's thankfully we have Bitcoin, so we have some measure of being able to resist this nihilistic future that's coming.
Well, it seems like everybody's in a trance, because just look at the response. The majority of people are docile.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least from my perspective. Maybe there's some closet non-docile people out there who do want to fight back, but the amount of people who are just running with the narrative that's shifting from week to week and parroting it to everybody else is pretty mind-blowing. It's scary.
Well, I mean, to be fair, they had 12 years to learn how to do exactly that. Maybe even like 16 or 20 years, right? Like, where basically the only correct answer was to parrot back to the teacher what they wanted to hear. We've been trained for this, man.
Right. It is crazy. And thank God we have Bitcoin, right? And it's crazy, the parallels of stories in the Bible and what's going on now. And like the Bible, I mean, it's a book of a moral framework from which to live live by, and filled with stories that sort of explain why you should live that way, and how you should view the world, and try to be a good person. And I think in the context of Bitcoin, one of the most famous stories that we probably touch on is Jesus throwing the money changers out of the temple. Like that story alone. He threw the money changers and people were selling pets, correct?
Well, so they were selling the things that you would need to sacrifice. So doves for poor people, I think, and lambs for slightly richer people. And one of the I think it's the chapter on the church. We have a whole chapter on like how like that money, fiat money, affects the church. And towards the end of it, we quote that exact story and say, now might be the time to flip over some tables, because things are pretty bad right now. And and that kind of indignation, that kind of passion about it, is sorely missing. Instead, you get lots and lots of compliance, lots and lots of people just sort of meekly, well, not even meek in a biblical sense, but almost like weakly going with it. I'm sure you've seen the picture on Twitter or something like that, where it's like 65 AD, Emperor Nero, I will throw you to the lions. And the Christian says, I will gladly do that for the glory of my God. 2020, Gavin Newsom, we're going to fine you $5,000 for attending church. And then, the Christian says, thank you for keeping me safe, which is like, oh God, how wimpy have we become? This is like, you need more indignation right now. You need more anger at what's going on. We're watering deserts of, I don't know, like passionless people. And it's a very sad situation.
Are you optimistic we can turn it around?
I hope so. I like part of the job of, I don't know, like the way I see this book, it kind of, I'm not saying we're prophets or anything. It's just like, it's supposed to have that kind of like prophetic voice, right? It's a call to turn things around, because the monetary system is just corrupting absolutely everything. And if you look at various trials and tribulations that Israel went through in the Old Testament, a lot of it came through things that you wouldn't necessarily think would corrupt them, like intermarrying with foreigners or something like that, which eventually ended up making the Israelites go worship another god and so on. I think that's essentially what's happened with the fiat money, is that it's corrupted all of society in ways that are just absolutely mind-boggling, and we point out some of those in the book. And as a result, like, we really need to turn things around, like recognize that and realize that there is redemption available, but it's not as easy as just going and buying Bitcoin, though that's going to help. But it's a whole mentality shift. It's a whole it's a call to repentance, right? Like it's a call to, potential redemption through recognizing the evil for what it is.
Yeah. And people are going to be like, you condescending people, Christians, talking about repentance and stuff. But it's like, look around. It's the #1 song in the fucking world right now. Wet Ass Pussy.
Is that really the #1 song? I don't pay attention.
At least it was at one point this year. And I forget. There was a meme going around of like a radio DJ saying, "Hey, we're not allowed to play Baby It's Cold Outside, but here is Wet Ass Pussy, a song about Marty B asking you to shove your dick in her mouth." It's like, oh my God.
It's a very power mad world right now, and I think people can sense that. And if you care about liberty, if you care about freedom, if you care about any of these things, like the nice thing is, like, Bitcoin is the resistance currency for all kinds of evil that's going on. Like if love of money is the root of all evil, Bitcoin is the sort of antidote to a lot of that evil. And hopefully it can help a lot of people to get a different mindset. And I certainly know it's true for me, and I'm sure it's true for you. Once you get Bitcoin, things change, and you start thinking differently, and you start prioritizing different things.
All right, let's pull on this thread a little bit, particularly for people who are probably screaming at their device of which they're listening to this podcast. There's so many people that love Bitcoin or obsessed with Bitcoin. Like how do those the love of all money is the root of all kinds of evil, and people's infatuation with Bitcoin particularly, how do you cross compute those?
Yeah, and there's a whole section in this, like Bitcoin doesn't fix our souls, right? Like it helps, but that's ultimately not what like the temptation is to think that it is salvation for our souls, and it's not. It's one of the many ways in which it's a blessing. It's something that we can use to enhance our lives and to make it better, but it is not Christ. It's not God. It's not it's the redemption of money, but it's not the redemption of our souls, if that makes sense. That is something else, and that requires something completely different. So there can be the temptation to worship Bitcoin as well, and I've certainly seen that, and but it's not nearly as much, I think, as with fiat money. But that said, putting money, like Bitcoin, is not putting it too high and not putting it too low, right? Like this is what we talked about at the beginning. It's like discounting everything that money does. That's not healthy, and worshiping it like it's the only thing that matters. That's not right either. It's putting it in the right place, right? That's what we would call temperance or moderation or something like that. It's doing it the right amount or loving it the right amount. And that's a subtle and nuanced thing that requires a lot of maturity to learn how to do. And I can't claim to know exactly what that point is, because, honestly, this is something I struggle with, is figuring out exactly where to put it and placing it in the right place. I will say, though, that it's a lot easier to do with Bitcoin than with fiat money, because fiat it's very hard to put in the right place because of the effects it has and all of the evil that it contains, with the power that comes from being able to steal from other people. So I'll leave it at that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. No, and I too am guilty of finding that temperance sometimes over expressing or over depending on my love for Bitcoin. But it's like weird. So like, let's try and put this in the context of our current condition. Like, we were born when Bitcoin was created, and like, so we obviously want Bitcoin to succeed. More importantly, we think it's imperative that it does succeed so we can fix a lot of what's wrong with society. How imperative are these early years in Bitcoin's life cycle that we do champion it to a certain extent? Yourself, you're educating people. I have this podcast. You have a newsletter. I have a newsletter. You have a podcast. Like, how important is this advocacy? And do we get to a point where it's unnecessary at some point in the future?
Yeah, and that's a difficult question, because that's essentially, I think, at least somewhat dependent on your personality, what your gifts are, what talents you might have, and what stage you are in life. It's one thing to be promoting it when you have relatively a lot of free time and savings and things like that, where you can kind of do that. It's another thing if you're like trapped under a lot of debt, and you're in a lot of you have a lot of bad habits, and you need to break, like, it really depends, right? And it's the degree to which Bitcoin, I think, is like a monetary imperative or a moral imperative to fix the monetary system, only goes so far as your capacity to be able to earn that. And that's, I mean, I'm not sure where you draw. I don't know if there's like a single rule that will cover all people that are, say, listening to the show. Like that, okay, you need to do this amount of promotion of Bitcoin before you are absolved of any evil that might come out of doing X, Y, or Z. So yeah.
Well, I don't mean in that context. I mean like in the context of if there is a window of opportunity through which we can ensure Bitcoin's success, not for individual quote unquote salvation or whatever, but just to ensure that this system survives. Like,
yeah. I wish I knew the answer, right? If only we put in this much effort, it will ensure Bitcoin success. I think like to have that kind of insight into the possible futures would be prophetic. I don't claim to have that. So, but I think it's overall very good thing, and it fixes a lot of ills that are almost passed over or ignored by a lot of Christians even. So like going in that direction is, I think, ultimately a very good thing, and hopefully something that we can achieve with this book a little bit.
Yeah. So much we can go into here. It's so people like to draw parallels between the launch of Bitcoin and the book of Genesis. Obviously, we have the Genesis block. Wasn't there 7 days between January 3rd and January 10th when the first block was officially mined? What do you think about these parallels? Do you think it was intentional, or you think?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask Satoshi, and I don't really know. I will say though that there's something of a self-sacrifice that I think Satoshi did in disappearing. That's kind of parallel with Christ's sacrifice. Not nearly as much, obviously, but there is that sense in which, at least how I choose to interpret his disappearance, as sort of gifting this tool to the world by disappearing, and that was really the only way that Bitcoin was ever going to be decentralized, was after him leaving. And the fact that he did is a gift to all of us. And I don't know, there are some people that might even go further and say, that was a gift from God or something like that. I don't know if I mean, in the sense that everything is a gift from God, I would agree. I don't know if it was like special revelation to, Satoshi Nakamoto, and, God raptured him away or something like that. I wouldn't go like anywhere near that. But yeah, recognizing it as a gift that it is, in the same way that that being saved is a gift, that Christ's grace is God's mercy is a gift. That's, I think, a useful way to look at it.
Yeah. I agree. It's certainly a gift. I mean, I've talked to a number of individuals on this podcast alone who've described how pessimistic they were before they found Bitcoin. Like, it's a common theme between Bitcoiners that there was almost an existential dread of pessimism and no hope for the future that Bitcoin sort of changed.
And it's something that the world could use right now. I don't know if you guys you're like receiving Christmas cards yet, but man, some people, they look like they aged a lot in the past 12 months or something. Like, just like being indoors and without human contact, and just having to process like bad news pretty much every day. It's taking a toll, and what they're missing is kind of hope. Bitcoin is hope right now, at least for those of us that hold it.
Yeah, it certainly is. I guess, like, how do we get people to drop their trust in these institutions, these Nietzschean evil institutions that are telling them how to live, taking away their free will, and put their trust in God? Like, I know it's no one path. It's a personal journey for each person. But again, we talked about like people will probably get freaked out that we're even having this conversation. People hear Jesus, religion, Christianity, they put their holes in their ears. They don't even want to listen to the opportunity to potentially find salvation through God. For the freaks that are still with us and maybe a bit curious and interested in exploring this, like what advice would you give to them?
Well, if you're at all curious, the first thing I would do is pray. If God exists, then and if he's a personal God, and if you pray, he hears you. And if you were God, what like, you know, would you refuse a request from somebody that says, okay, if you're really there, then reveal yourself? I think that's a very reasonable prayer to say, okay, something is really weird right now, and I'm depressed, and I don't feel like my life is meaningful, and that I'm depressed or whatever. But I you know, my worldview has always been atheistic or something else. But if God is there and he's listening, like, reveal yourself to me. I think that's a perfectly fine prayer to have. And that's a way in which you can sort of test the hypothesis, if you will. I personally know a bunch of people that have prayed exactly that prayer and were extremely surprised at the results. You know, from every ethnicity and you know, people from all around the world that have prayed that prayer and said, okay, yeah, I found out. And if you do it sincerely, I don't think he would refuse. So yeah, I would say start there and explore what you need to explore. But you know, it's an open invite, but no one's forcing you. God is not a Nietzschean God that says, I'm going to force you all to worship me. That's not how he is. Whereas our authorities, unfortunately, have taken that Nietzschean ethic and are essentially forcing us to do whatever it is that they want us to do. And if you think that there's a better option, then I would suggest you look into it that way.
Yeah. And why should we fear God?
Well, if defining God as like the uncaused cause, right? And this gets into a little bit of philosophy about like what that means.
Right. Yeah, it's misunderstood a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. It's you know, like the atheists do this like sleight of hand. I just believe in one less God than you. No, you don't. It's at least by the definition of uncaused cause, there can only be one. And you can logically prove that. If there were more than one thing that was uncaused, then, you know, you'd have to figure out what the difference is. And then there's a whole set of arguments that Aquinas makes along these lines. There are modern translations that you can look up. I won't waste your time with those particular arguments. But there is God, and in doing whatever it is that you need to do to understand what's going on, oh gosh, did I just lose my train of thought? I think I did. Can you cut that part out? I don't know.
We don't make edits here, but we are at a minute or an hour, 4 minutes and 32 seconds. I'll write it down. But yeah, like, what is the common misunderstanding with the phrase "you should fear God"? Or
yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was where I was going. So fearing God is just knowing what he can do, right? Like what position he holds in the universe, and that is literally sustainer of all things, all life, everything. And if you don't fear that in some way, then like you don't actually get the concept, or you don't really, or you have a sense of entitlement that's way too large for your ego. Does that make sense? I would say it that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And That's another thing I talked about with Brian Harrington when he was on this podcast a few months ago. He shared the story of Jesus going to save the one sheep that was left on the mountain. He left the whole herd. And really what that story drives home is that Jesus is there for the individual, for you, and is here to empower the individual and let you know that you are special and you can bring value to this world, this humanity that you're a part of, which a lot of people seem to have lost track of. That yes, we are a society, but the individual is special. You are special, created in His image, and you do have a purpose at the end of the day if you're willing to search it out and explore it.
Yeah, I think C.S. Lewis put it this way. Like for most of human history, it was thought that the empire would live on. So the empire is more important than any individual or something like that. And this is sort of like a common theme through every civilization. The thing that Christianity makes different is that we are all eternal beings, and we're all living forever, whether in hell or heaven or whatever. And that means that each individual is of infinite importance, whereas an empire or a country or a party or whatever is at best temporary. So like you just do the math and infinity is greater than something finite. So that's another way to look at how God sees things.
Yeah. Which is, let's try and tie this back to Bitcoin, like the way the blockchain works. Like if it does sustain itself into the future, these transactions are going to be imbued in this ledger for eternity, and everybody in the future is going to be able to prove something that happened in the past and know that it objectively happened. Is a pretty mind-blowing fact when you think about it.
Yeah, well, it's a log of truth, and it's so Robert Breedlove's one of my co-authors. So one of the things that he likes to sort of chew on is this idea of truth being a very good description of reality, right? Or at least that's how I would define truth. The thing about like what we were talking about with Nietzschean ethic and sort of like the end of actual history, and it's all just sort of like twisting narratives. You don't get the truth at all, and in fact, to a large degree, truth doesn't matter in those contexts. I mean, you look at what's going on with the election. You have one side that basically watches the network news and believes whatever is coming out of their mouths, and then you have another side that listens to talk radio and believes whatever is coming out of their mouths. It's almost as if like they believe what they want to believe rather than what the actual truth is. There's no real respect for truth anymore. And this is something that happens when it's all about power. The truth is a means, not an end. It's not about discovering truth at all. It's about using it to further your own power. And that's what politics has essentially become when you remove God from the equation. Because, ninth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor, right? Like it's part of respecting reality by describing it truthfully. That's part of the Christian ethic that's been removed as a result of removing God from it. And the thing that having a blockchain or having some record of truth brings back is that there is an objective reality, and you can't deny that. You can't just be like, oh, well, you know what? My reality is that I actually didn't give you 10 Bitcoins in, 2012 or something like that. It's there's no such thing. There's an objective reality that you have to abide by, and that in itself should be very obvious, but in the world today, that sort of thing isn't. And you have lots of conflict over stuff like that. I mean, like, I don't know if you saw like the stupid 2 + 2 = 5 thing on Twitter a while back.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like
2 + 2 = 4 is oppression.
yeah, so that's where like we're getting to almost like a post-truth society where like the truth actually doesn't matter, and this is like straight out of 1984. You know, where the guy says, you know, if I tell you it's 2 + 2 = 5, then you're going to believe 2 + 2 = 5. Now, for science and stuff, we're still going to believe 2 + 2 = 4. But if I tell you that 2 + 2 = 5, you will believe it. And I mean, it's the most sociopathic, you know, authoritarian thing. But that's kind of the reality that we're headed towards very quickly. And that, I mean, hopefully that scares you to at least take a look at what natural law is and everything else, because that's where you end up when you remove God from the equation to a large degree. I respect a lot of atheists that are able to have sort of a moral code without God, but like logically speaking, this is where it leads, and it's a very scary place.
Yeah, no, it's happening. It's happening. We're talking about YouTube, like they're saying it. I mean, I think like you just described, you get multiple talking heads. People just confirm their bias, but when you just shut down the ability to have a conversation about it, and let people explore and try to discover truth by their own means, you're ending up in that 1980. We're here. It's here. Yeah. It's here.
And the scary thing is, like words start losing meaning, and we've already like removed the ability for people to like meet each other and stuff. When words lose meaning, then you lose the ability to communicate. And I mean, how fundamental is that to being a human, right? Like to be able to communicate with other people.
Well, that's something that's been the most dismaying for me this year, particularly again, having an infant, a toddler now. My son's 10 months old. It's like everybody wearing masks and not being able to read faces. It's such a formative age, like not being able to see people smile, only seeing mask in their eyes. And it's something like that is why I've been searching for, I've been traveling to places that don't mandate masks outside and try to give him the ability to see facial expressions, actually have his brain form in a way that it should. You're taking that fundamental human connection away. It's insane.
Well, it's dehumanizing. It's debasing humanity, and that this whole year has been one long debasement of human dignity, and what, well, in terms of like natural law rights and things like that, but also just like very basic communication and need for other people and things like that. It's a debasement of all of that, and unfortunately, a lot of people are okay with it because they prioritize, you know, I guess physical life over any sort of, you know, purpose or meaning to their lives. I think that's a terrible trade-off. It's on par with Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah. Right. But it's even though we're being very pessimistic here, it seems like people are waking up. Like, you see the New Yorker cover. I know.
I saw the cover with basically like a messy room on Zoom or something like that.
Yeah, woman in her early 30s drinking wine, hanging out with her cats, talking to somebody over Zoom. Like, that's where society is right now.
And how meaningless is that, right? Like, you're not even like actually talking to somebody in person. You know, you're not doing anything meaningful. Your room's a complete mess, and your communication is through like this little window on a screen, instead of the entire experience of your full being. That just seems so. Like it limits the human soul so much. It's projecting onto like 2 dimensions what's like 8 dimensions, and it's mind-boggling that people are standing for that or I don't know, maybe like humans have been debased in so many dimensions so much that it doesn't feel like that much more of a debasement to be forced to stay inside and do like just Zoom chats.
Well, it's funny. I have page 86 of your book right now up on my screen here. Hyperinflation. Therefore, this inequity will be to you like a breath about to fall, a bulge in a high wall. His collapse comes suddenly in an instant. And talking about the debasement of humanity, like, is there a hyperinflation of humanity debasement going on right now? Is there a tipping point?
Yeah, I would say so, because like, what is, so the question I would ask first is, the government is debasing humanity, right? Like, or human dignity to a degree through its exercise of authoritarianism. What are they getting back for it?
More control.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like being God or something like that, right? Like it's this idea of power or something else, and it's always inevitably for a few particular people.
And they're all hypocritical too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They'll tell you, stay home, wear a mask, don't gather with more than 5 people. And yet they'll go to Michelin star restaurants, dining without masks indoors with 15 people. They'll go on trips. They don't abide by.
Yeah. And that hypocrisy is a symptom of that Nietzschean like ethic of, I'm going to do what I want to you. And there's nothing you can do about it because the rules can be different for me and you, because of course I'm the one in power. That's sort of there's a weird status game at play here. Right. And really by pushing the dignity of other people down, they're raising themselves in status a little bit. And they're willing to do that because status is zero sum. You push enough people down just a little bit, you go up.
Yeah, but what's the end goal there? You suppress everybody else, and everybody else lives in misery, and you are able to say you're in power, and then you die, and society's just a wasteland behind your death.
Yeah, something like that. I still remember like the ending or towards the end of the book 1984. It's like, you know why we do this, Winston? And then Winston's like, yeah, it's because it's for our own good, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, no, we do this for power. We do this for power only. And the party exists only so that it can have power. And it's a very pathological like way of looking at things. Well, it's literally sociopathic. But that I think is like what you get when you don't have God in the picture. Is there's no higher authority, so you are that authority, and exercising power is its own drug almost. I think the phrase is called like libido dominandi, the lust for power. It's an addiction in of itself that perpetuates, and it causes. I think you're seeing it right now, probably in a lot of governors and people like that are like doing obviously hypocritical things, but it's about power to them, and it puts them higher in status somehow, despite like actually not like they're not getting to enjoy life like they were before COVID either, but at least from a relative standpoint, they're doing way better than us plebs that are having to stay home.
Yeah. This just incited a question in my mind, like, has the debasement of the money and of society led to a lack of God in people's lives, or is a lack of God in people's lives led to the former?
Which came first, the chicken or the egg, huh?
Yeah.
Or more precisely, like destruction of the egg or the destruction of the chicken, because they're both sort of like negative things. It's hard to say. Yeah, I would suspect that. Yeah, it would be really interesting to trace sort of like Enlightenment thinking, and which is really what started the whole atheism craze, basically. And the advent of central banking and sort of like creating that fiat money because I do think they run together somewhat.
Right. Yeah, the destruction of the nuclear family slowly but surely over the last 5 decades, which a nuclear family is probably more likely to be God-fearing, try to replicate, try to go forth, and multiply.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a correlation. I'm not sure which causes which, or even if it's that simple. It might be a nonlinear relation. But there's definitely something there about like a lack of belief in God. I mean, so one of the things that we point out in the book is in Faust, that's a play by Goethe or whatever his name is. But there, basically there's a king, and there's an advisor named Mephistopheles, who's basically the devil, saying like, okay, you can go and debase money. And he was unwilling to do it because he was like, well, but that doesn't exist. Well, it's just gold that you haven't dug up yet. Just issue those. And he eventually does it, and it leads to all sorts of evil. But I imagine that those two have some correlation, because if you believe that you will be punished for not respecting reality, then you're less likely to create something as evil as fiat money. But if you do respect God and all of the moral consequences that come out of that, and then you wouldn't do that, right? Like the whole of the current central banking fiat-backed monetary system is based on debt, and debt, as we argue in the book, is a form of slavery. So you're able to enslave the entire population through this money, and that is really scary. That is essentially what's happened to a lot of us, especially if you're in a rent-seeking job. You really have no recourse.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very happy that Robert Breedlove has really honed in on in recent months is the fact that we're modern day slaves due to the monetary system that we're under, and due to the slave trade in the 1800s here in the US, 1800s. People sort of shy away from going as far to say that we are subjected to some form of slavery today, but there's no doubt about it, we are.
Yeah, and I think that's what usury really is, and that's another popular topic from the Bible. What the heck is usury? It's a way of enslaving someone with money, and I mean, that sort of thing is very common in, say, like India today, where somebody's in financial trouble and they'll lend them like $100 worth, and basically the way to they'll make them work to pay it off, but then the interest is too much that they can't pay off the original principal because the interest is growing faster than they can work it. And that sort of thing is very common in different parts of the world. That's what I think is usury. And if you think
payday loans here,
but I mean, it's being done at sort of like a societal level, where we're made to pay for stuff that we didn't even get the benefits of. It's really like debt from the 1960s or whatever, and it's a perpetual slavery of an entire people. And the U.S. does it to all the other countries where they're able to export fiat money in exchange for goods and services. Like I don't know how the U.S. is able to do that and get away with it. Basically, they send out money that they print and they get goods and services. What?
And going back to Jesus kicking the money changers out of the temple and flipping the table, like having a child and realizing that the system and QE, what's going on today, M1's increased by, I believe, 35 to 55% this year. I forget whether M1 or M2, but there's like something like a third of the money that's ever been printed was printed this year. Just what are you doing? You're pulling future production to the present, and you're forcing
or taking current
people
savings into your honeypot, I guess, and not just from the US people, because all the money's in other central bank vaults and stuff. you're pulling it from all over the world, from some of the poorest people. The ones that experience hyperinflation, they're the ones paying first.
Yeah. And as a parent, it makes you literally want to flip a table and be like, I don't want my child, my future children to come after a singular child that I have now to live under the system.
Yeah. And this is one of the questions that we ask in the book is like, man, like we're taking out mortgages, right? That's money that's being printed just for us. But really, that's theft from all the other people that have saved money, because it's not coming from one particular person's savings, because it's created out of thin air. You're expanding the money supply for your own benefit. The bank benefits, you benefit, society does not. Every loan is like that. And it's like, well, if that's the case, is that licit, right? Like to use sort of like a Catholic term, like, is that licit? Is that a good thing? Is that something that God would allow? I don't think so. Like if it's a loan from somebody's savings, it's one thing. But if it's a loan in the conventional sense, which is money printed out of nothing for your benefit, but at the expense of the community, I don't think so. And I speak as somebody that has a mortgage. I'm like, dude, I'm part of the problem.
Well, is it possible not to be part of the problem today?
Yeah, if you don't have debt, I think you're pretty clear on, at least on that front. But I mean, pretty much everyone is entangled in this massive sin of fiat money, and I include like churches on this too, because they take out mortgages on their big beautiful buildings. And it's not just stealing from the savings of people in the United States. You're stealing from the savings of people all over the world, right? Like wherever there's a dollar standard, you're probably stealing from them. I mean, a tiny amount, but it's still some amount.
This brings up an interesting topic, a topic that's been hot on the Twitterverse this week. Is it a moral imperative to speculative attack the dollar and hyper Bitcoinize faster, so that all that debt can be essentially demonetized and debased?
Yeah, I mean, this is where this is where I think you have to sort of have the attitude of the prophet. Like if you've warned people and then they all ignore you, and then it might be okay for a speculative attack. I don't know. But I don't know if people have been sufficiently warned. Hopefully this book helps them, but that's it's the like iniquity that we're all in, is this weird system of fiat money that's just a cesspool of thievery that we've all more or less kind of participated in. Yeah, like how much are we culpable? I don't know. Like that's a hard question, but it's one worth pondering.
Yeah, one should be at least a bit inquisitive, right? Or else you'll just lead that life of existential dread that we've been talking about. You wake up one day and be like, what the hell did I do with my life? It's another thing like we should drive home too. Is like maybe a bit scary to put yourself out there and try to provide value in a world by trying to find purpose that may not provide a direct line of income or financial security, at least as you presently perceive it. But I don't know where I'm going here. I sort of lost my
so that whole idea of like working with your hands to provide value to other people, I think that is what a lot of people's purposes should be, right? Like it's I think it's in Ephesians. It says work with your hands, right? Like he who steals should steal no longer, but working with his hands to produce something good, right? Like that's what we should be doing. But too many people would rather go find a rent-seeking job, and which is really doing nothing and getting paid for it, because of their desire to. Because work is essentially a disutility, they don't want to do it, and they would rather not provide value and still collect an income, which unfortunately is true of way too many people.
I agree.
That's
good.
That's the existential dread. Those are the people that are seeking purpose and meaning. It's right there. You just need to go and work and do something with your hands that actually provides value to others. And that's where I think entrepreneurship is, I think, biblical. It's something that when you do create something that is of value to other people, it is a lot more satisfying. And that existential dread goes away to a large degree, instead of feeling like you're useless and doing nothing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm clicking and moving my mouse here because I want to pull up a tweet. And again, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn or what we're doing at Great American Mining, but that's something I tweeted out right before we hopped on, is that I love working at Great American Mining because we're actually building things, physical things that can potentially have a profound effect on our economy. Right? And that's another opportunity provided by the Bitcoin network. Like, there is a physical nature that many people discredit or completely overlook in the Bitcoin network, which is the active proof of work consensus mechanism that dictates that you have to plug in physical machines and create physical infrastructure with your hands. And again, I feel very grateful to be part of the Great American Mining team. So we're actually building things with our hands, not me personally, but I'm helping the company as we build these physical things to help oil and gas producers and the Bitcoin network at large.
Yeah, and there's something noble about that, right? Like about adding value to society through capitalism, like getting paid what you're worth because what you produce is actually like useful to others, and that's something that we talk about all throughout the book, is that money is a representation of how much value, or it should be, ideal money should be a representation of the value you've provided other people, and that it's storing up the value for later consumption, and like accumulating that capital, you can actually use it later to start another business or to provide even more value through a bigger supply of money being used for something or other. That's real value, and that's how the civilization gets built up. And unfortunately, that's been deprecated in favor of sort of like the government model, which is, fund a few companies that employ everybody, and it's way more kind of socialist than capitalist in that way.
Yeah, that's one thing I really appreciate about Bitcoiners, especially when they're thinking long term, and people like Bitstein, like Michael Goldstein, who think about the future they want to build, particularly around buildings and things that'll be around forever, which isn't necessarily something that they'll build for themselves, but for society at large. Like, Bitcoiners talk about building things that last generations, centuries, things that will provide benefits to people after we're dead. Bitcoin itself, as you're building it out, right? It's a long-term goal. It's sort of selfless because you're ensuring that future generations have this very important tool that preserves dignity and the ability to live a good life, as we've been describing throughout this whole conversation.
Yeah, there were all these like families back in the Renaissance and stuff that had like 200-year plans to like irrigate like particular lands and stuff, like just public works that basically would take many generations. And even cathedrals and things like that, they were built by people, usually fairly small numbers of people, which is surprising. Like a giant cathedral built by like a village of like 100 people or something like that, and it took like 130 years. But that's more than the lifetime of any single builder, and they did it because that was something that they wanted to last. And those buildings are still up today, whereas like buildings now, they're all kind of utilitarian or done for the sake of usage instead of beauty or something like that. There's no purpose beyond the lifespan of a single person.
Yeah, I think hospitals are a great representation of this, right? Like hospitals used to be beautiful places, especially in Europe. Huge buildings with tall ceilings, a lot of natural light. Now everything's just completely desanitized and very, I don't know how to describe it, bleak, if you will.
Yeah, or sterile or something like
Sterile. Sterile is the word I was looking for. Yes.
Yeah, just kind of gross in a weird way. Describing a hospital as gross is a little bit weird, but yeah, it's and you lose that beauty that comes from that, and that idea of something that's transcendent. And that's something honestly that we've lost. There aren't that many timeless sort of transcendent beauty things anymore, which speaks to the fact that a lot of people aren't looking to make those things or value those, or enough people that value those things. So very, very sad. But let's make sure to add that Bitcoin is something that does seem like it will last. So that at least has, is something that is being created now that is going to be there for future generations and so on.
Yeah, something that can be rallied around.
Yeah.
And so I guess we can end it on this. Like, so bringing it back to the beginning of the conversation, we're talking about ethics of money production. And what was the other book you mentioned?
Honest Money.
Honest Money, both having sort of negative endings and not really optimistic endings. How does Thank God We Have Bitcoin provide an optimistic view of the future for your readers?
Well, the main thing is, we first of all point out that gold has failed, and it's failed multiple times. And the reason why it's failed is because it's central. It's very easy to centralize because it's physical and it's hard to secure. What Peter Schiff thinks is the main advantage of gold is its actual ultimate weakness is that it's very hard to secure. So everyone puts it in a vault. That leads to fractional reserve lending. That leads to lots of bankruptcies, which leads to central banks, which leads to it being converted to fiat money. And then it's just sort of like step after step after step of iniquity, of doing things the wrong way in order for things to be convenient for those in power. With Bitcoin, we have the ability to do things differently than we did with gold, because gold is, in a weird way, led to fiat money. But with Bitcoin, we have the ability to be our own banks. We have the ability to run our own nodes. We have the ability to verify ourselves instead of trusting somebody else. And there's no third party that sits in between that can be regulated, that controls everything or whatever. And that is very, very powerful because it means that the money can be separated from the state and we can opt out of all of this. So instead of trying to get a political consensus around the gold standard, we don't have to do that with Bitcoin. We can all each opt out on our own. And we can do things slowly instead of needing one major political push in order to get it done, kind of like what they had to do with abolition in England or whatever. I mean, it took Wilberforce something like 22 years before he was able to abolish slavery, and he introduced it every year. It took a tremendous amount of political will to do. Bitcoin is not like that at all. It doesn't require that level of tremendous political willpower. It just requires individuals to opt out on their own. And it's, in a sense, almost inevitable because hard money wins over bad money. And what we have right now is bad money. And that's the hope, is that the people that read it will say, okay, I believe this. And it does seem inevitable. I'm going to make it happen a little earlier by getting into Bitcoin myself. And that's all it takes.
Some powerful stuff. Thank you for writing this book. Thank God we have Bitcoin.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It was a pleasure to speak to you about it. And Yeah, it's 6 months of coronavirus Zoom calls essentially that made it happen. So, yeah.
Where can the freaks find it?
It's on Amazon. Thank God for Bitcoin. Just search for it. 8 authors, including myself, Robert Breedlove, Julia Turiansky, George McHale, and many others. So it's a pretty short read, 120, 140 pages, something like that. Yeah, it shouldn't take more than a couple hours to read on a lazy Saturday or something like that. And we all have lots of lazy Saturdays with Corona around.
Yeah. Well, thank you for writing it. Thank you for coming on. It's a long time coming, and I think I have an Austin trip coming at some point in early 2021. So I'm definitely going to hit you up. We can meet in person, and we don't have to talk via this Zoom call.
Well, then maybe we can record something for my podcast. I don't know. We'll see.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Bitcoin fixes the oil and gas industry.
That would be interesting, actually.
It is. Yeah, we can dive into that. I've got a lot of material on that particular subject.
All right. Well, let's do it then.
Awesome. Well, we'll coordinate that off the record. Jimmy, thank you for coming on. It's been an incredible conversation again. One that I don't get to have too often. I'm very selfishly happy that we had this particular conversation, because people tend to shy away from this stuff.
Anytime, man. Anytime. And, even offline, just let me know if you ever want to talk about it, because it's something that I feel is a big part of who I am, and I don't mind talking about it at all.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that offer. Thank you for coming on. That's all we got today, freaks. Peace and love.